Hello, my name is Alex and I am the host of How Bizarre Podcast, and this is episode 11 of the series. Hopefully you'll like it and the show will make some traction in the time ahead. So, what is this podcast about? It's about storytelling and especially about stories that are obscure, unknown to the wider public, strange and sometimes inexplicable, content that somehow never got the attention it deserved, stories that are forgotten in the mists of time regardless if they happened yesterday or some centuries ago. So if you are attracted to bizarre, shocking or just plainly weird stuff, I think you'll find this podcast very informative and perhaps even entertaining. This podcast is for mature audiences and listener discretion is advised. All that being said, now let us dive into episode 11 of How Bizarre Podcast. Just a brief mention, this being 10th episode, it is a small jubilee for an upstart podcaster and I like that fact. This episode is titled The Leatherman. In conversation, people often say that their life revolves around a circle, sometimes a circle from which it is difficult to see a way out. But for one man the circle of the curse has become literal, a way of atoning for a long-forgotten sin that has remained in his soul, to forever remind him of the ruin of the possibility of a happy life. As a self-proclaimed realistic version of the creature created by Dr. Victor Frankenstein, this man considered that he did not deserve to exist among people anymore, although unlike the child of the new Prometheus, his resentment was moral and not physical. Or so he thought, sticking to some very strict moral principles. In the northeastern United States near Sawmill Woods, around 1858, people began noticing a man dressed in rough leather clothing that he tailored himself to appear at regular intervals in certain places. At first they did not pay much attention to the strange giant, but after a while they realized that the interval after which he appears in their place is the same. That was 36 days. What they later learned was that the man of skin, as he was called, traveled 587 miles or 945 kilometers around the Connecticut and Hudson rivers, always passing by there, and not just their neighborhoods. In time, the silent eccentric became sympathetic to them, so they gave him food and tried to find out who he was and why he traveled to the same places non-stop for years. The man, apart from mumbling in strange sounds, sometimes said something in French but could not understand it. And it was obvious that he did not understand English. He never hurt anyone. On the contrary, he was kind to people despite his dark appearance. Apparently children liked him very much because he always had an apple or a pear to share with them. Over the decades, the Leatherman became part of the local life, the fathers telling the children that in so many days the great Leatherman would pass through their neighborhood. And man has always really passed. He slept in caves and caverns strategically located along his eternal path, feeding on what he found, caught, or accepted from well-meaning people. No one knew his identity, although many stories and speculations were woven. It was not until 1889 that he crossed the eternal path drawn in his head for the last time for the 360th time and was found dead from the cold due to the unusually harsh winter that year when worn leather clothing failed to save him. A French Bible and some letters and objects were found in the cave, but the identity remained secret. Later, after entering local folklore, journalists and investigators tried to uncover the secret. The most famous speculation was that he was supposedly born in Lyon, France, under the name of Jules Bourglais, where he worked as a carpenter. Golgotha began after he fell in love with Margaret Lynn and wanted to marry her. Being from a wealthy family, her father, in keeping with the values of his time, refused to allow marriage but still decided to give Gilles a chance by employing him in his tannery. If Gilles had made a good career in a few years, he would have gotten Margaret's hand. The beginning was promising. Jules made good progress and gained confidence. But impatience was the ace up the sleeve of the crash that was tasked with capturing another soul. Gio wanted to make one final move that would shorten the waiting time for the wedding, which is to invest in buying a large amount of leather, expecting prices to rise dramatically in the coming period. Instead, a new tanning technique appeared on the scene that the factory in which he worked did not have, and the value of the procurement, instead of increasing, fell by half. All the savings, the trust, the big money from the owner, and the possibility of marrying with his love, disappeared as if they never existed. Unable to face the new reality and the ruin of all dreams, Jules disappeared from Lyon after a while, and soon from France. The story does not tell how he got to the United States, but it does not matter after all. Another version is made by a Canadian Frenchman who fled for similar reasons across the US border. Jules became the man of skin, turning the eternal circle in his conscience and in the forests of the state of New York. Voluntarily lonely for the rest of his life, isolated from the small and big pleasures of life, and without hope that the human heart will dare to love him, he left in eternity and in the memory of generations of locals who until today retold the alleged life story of a very real Leatherman. I hope you all liked episode 11 of this podcast. Thank you so kindly for listening, and I will be back next time for episode 12 of the How Bizarre podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, sharing, and above all, subscribe to this channel, dear listener. Because, why not? Join me next time for another bizarre adventure through space and time.